We've spent the last season noticing something uncomfortable, that we repeat patterns even when we see them. We recognize them in our relationship, in our reactions, in the moments we tell ourselves that this time will be different. And yet, something isn't, which raises a deeper question. If we can see the patterns, then why does it feel like something is running automatically? Why do we still react the same way, make the same choices, even when we know better? What if the answer is this? You are not just reacting to life, your brain is running a program you didn't write. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to a new season with me. This season, we're going deeper, not just into seeing the patterns, but into understanding what is actually running them. Because most of us move through life with this quiet belief that we are thinking freely, we are choosing freely, responding to events freely. But if we slow down and really look, something should feel a little different. Have you, for example, noticed that you meet someone new and within short time you feel something very familiar, not about them, but about how you feel around them? Or you find yourself in a situation where you know how you want to respond, but something else comes out instead. Or you say yes when part of you clearly wants to say no. Or you promised yourself that you won't fall into the same dynamic again, and then slowly, almost without noticing, you're back in it. Not because you choose it consciously. This is happening because something in you already knew how to be there. So in reality, a large part of what we experience is shaped by something already stored, already learned, and already repeated, not as a thought we consciously choose, but as a response that have been practiced over time. So instead of asking, what do I want to do right now? Something has happened on a deeper level first. What have I done before in a moment like this? And that response happens faster than reflection, faster than intention, which is why it feels so automatic and so normal. Not because we're not aware, but because the system that learned that pattern is still running. And most of the time, we don't notice it as a program. We experience it as this is just who I am. This is just how I feel. This is just how things go. But what if it's not who we are? What if what has been repeated long enough to feel this is us? And if that's true, then the question is no longer just, why do I keep doing this? But something different. What is running in the background before I even choose? The brain is not designed to experience everything as new. It is designed to predict, because if we had to process every moment from scratch, every conversation, every expression, every decision, we would be overwhelmed. So the brain does something incredibly efficient. It takes past experiences, emotional memories, repeated patterns, and use them to build a kind of internal program, not a literal code, but a set of expectations, a map of what things usually mean and how we usually respond. So instead of asking what is happening right now, the brain quietly observes and asks, what does this remind me of? And then it feels the rest. It predicts tones before words are fully processed. It predicts intentions before behavior is fully understood. It predicts outcomes before reality unfolds, which means we are not always responding to the present moment. We are often responding to a memory that feels like present. So, for example, someone takes a little longer to reply to a message when in reality nothing has been said yet, but inside something activates. They're losing interest and being ignored, not because that is what is happening, but because something in the system has seen a familiar pattern before, or someone gives neutral feedback at work, let's say, and instead of hearing information, it feels like criticism, like something is wrong. Again, it's not because of what was said, it's because of what it resembles. And this is how the program runs quietly in the background automatically. It doesn't announce itself as interpretation, it feels like reality, which means we are not always seeing things as they are. We are seeing them as they have been patterned to appear. And once we start to see that, something changes, because we begin to realize not everything we feel is coming from what is happening now. Some of it is coming from what has been repeated before. And here's where it gets interesting. The brain constantly is changing. This is what we call neuroplasticity, which means that your brain is not fixed. It's always adapting, always reorganizing, always strengthening what is used most. But it doesn't change randomly. It follows a very simple rule. It strengthens what is repeated. So the more we think certain thoughts, feel certain emotions, react in certain ways, the more those pathways become easier to access. Not because they're true, not because they're helpful, but because they are familiar. And over time, what was once a reaction becomes a pattern. And what was once a pattern becomes automatic, almost like a shortcut. So instead of creating a new response every time, the brain uses what it already knows, even if that known is limiting, even if it creates the same outcomes, even if it hurts. And the brain prioritizes what it knows over what is better. This is why change can feel so overwhelming and so uncomfortable, even when it is positive, because something new, even if it's healthier, is still unfamiliar. For example, a calm, consistent relationship can feel strange or boring at first because the system is used to that emotional intensity, uncertainty, or that emotional inconsistency. Or expressing your needs clearly can feel very uncomfortable, even if it leads to better connections, because staying quiet may have once been the safer option. So we don't just repeat behavior, we repeat what the brain has learned to recognize as normal. And this is why the same program keeps running, not because it is right, but because it is reinforced. And once something is reinforced enough, it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like this is just how I am and this is how I react. But in reality, it's what has been practiced long enough to become automatic. So where does this program come from? And here's the part that we don't fully question. We didn't consciously create most of this. We didn't sit down and decide, this is who I am going to be in life. This is how I'll respond to love. This is what feels safe to me. It happened very slowly through experience. The program was built over time through childhood experiences, emotional environments that was rewarded and what was rejected, the way people around you expressed or didn't express emotions, cultural expectations about how we should be, inherited beliefs we absorb through questioning, repeated messages about who we are and how life works, not as clear instruction, but as impressions, patterns, associations. So at some point, without even realizing it, we learn things like, if I stay quiet, I'll be safe. If I give more, I'll be valued. If I perform well, I'll be accepted. if I don't ask for too much, I will not be rejected. Or love requires effort. That's a belief. Attention has to be earned. That's a belief. Being emotional is too much. Being independent is safer than relying on someone. That's a belief. And none of this felt like learning at the time. It felt like life. But the brain was paying attention. It was noticing what leads to connection, what leads to discomfort, what leads to approval, and what leads to rejection. And it stored all of it, not as ideas, not as something to think about, but as patterns to repeat. So later in life, when we find ourselves reacting in certain ways, choosing certain dynamics, feeling certain things automatically, that is not random. It's the program activating, a program that once made sense, a program that once helped us adapt, a program that once created stability in environments that were not always stable. But over time, what helped us adapt becomes what defines how we experience everything. And the most subtle part is this: because we learned it so early on in life, it doesn't feel like something we learned. It feels like this is who I am. But what if it's not just what we learn to be? So in a way, we're not just living life, we're living through a constructed interpretation of it. We may also call it matrix, not necessarily because something external is controlling us, but because our perception is filtered. And this filter is not random. It is built layer by layer through experience, through repetition, through meaning we assigned, often unconsciously. Almost like living inside a story, or matrix if you want to call it, that was written gradually over time, not in one moment, but in thousands of small moments. How people responded to us, what felt safe, what felt uncomfortable, what we learned to expect. And over time, those experiences didn't just pass, they organized, they formed a lens. So now when we move through life, we are not just seeing what is there, we're seeing what fits the story we already carry. For example, let's say two people can experience the same situation and walk away with completely different interpretation of it. One sees distance and feels rejected, and the other one sees space and feels neutral. Same moment, different realities. Because what we call reality is not just what is happening, it's what's being filtered through our internal model of the world. And this is where the metaphor becomes useful, not because we are trapped in literal system, but because we are often unaware of the lens we're looking through, a lens that feels like me, a lens that feels like truth, a lens that feels unquestionable, but was shaped long before we ever thought to question it. And once begin to see that, changes start, because we realize we're not just experiencing life, we're interpreting life. And if perception is shaped, then it can also be seen. And what can be seen can eventually be changed. So how do we begin to see this in real life? Not by overthinking, not by analyzing every moment, but by noticing every specific moment, the one we usually move through too quickly to question. Moments like, I reacted before I even thought. This feels familiar again. I'm saying yes, but something in me feels off. I've had this exact emotional reaction before. Someone's tone shifts slightly and you feel something tightens. inside. You start explaining yourself before even anyone asks you to. You prepare for rejection before anything has actually happened. Those moments are not random. They are signals. They are the points where the program is running. And the shift is not in behavior at first. It starts in the awareness. Because now, instead of being completely inside that reaction, inside that story, we are also seeing it. And that creates a small but powerful distinction. Autopilot feels automatic. Conscious response feels noticed. Autopilot happens fast, without space. Conscious response includes even a brief pause. Not a perfect response, not a controlled response, just a moment where we realize something is happening in me right now, that little space. And that moment is where everything begins, because we don't need to stop the pattern immediately. We need to see it clearly first. Then we're no longer completely lost inside it. And once that awareness is there, even briefly, the pattern is no longer invisible. And what is no longer invisible can no longer run in exactly the same way. And here's where most of us go wrong. The moment we notice a pattern, we immediately try to change it. We try to control the reactions, stop the feeling, replace the thought, do better next time. But something happens when you do that. We turn awareness into pressure, and the system that created the pattern doesn't respond well to pressure. It tightens, it gets defensive, it goes back to what it knew. So instead of change, we often get frustration because we think, I see it, so why can I not change it? But the real change doesn't start with control. It starts with awareness, not judgment, not forcing, not fixing yourself, just seeing clearly and allowing that to be seen without immediately trying to become someone else. Because the moment we see a pattern without fully identifying with it, something begins to loosen. We are no longer only the reaction, we are also the one noticing it. And that distinction is small but very powerful, because patterns rely on unconscious repetition. They run strongest when they are invisible. But when they are seen, even briefly, they don't operate in exactly the same way. Not instantly gone, not fully dissolved, but slightly less automatic, slightly less convincing, slightly less, this is just me. And that is how change actually begins, not in this dramatic way, but in this very quiet shift from being the pattern to seeing the pattern. And over time, when that space grows, in that space, new responses become possible. And they're not forced, they're just there. So maybe the question is no longer, why do I keep doing this? But something else. What in me is running before I even choose? Once we begin to see that, we're no longer completely inside that reaction, inside that story, no longer fully merged with that pattern. We are also observing it, and that changes the nature of the experience, because the program can still run, but it is no longer invisible. And what is no longer invisible no longer has the same power. So change doesn't begin when everything is different. It begins the moment something is seen clearly. And that is where this season begins. So my lovelies, I want to thank you for being here and for stepping into this new season with me. This is where we move from understanding into actually changing how we experienced life before, not by forcing, not by becoming someone else, but by seeing more clearly first what has been running in the background all along. So if this episode resonated with you, please do share your thoughts with me. I really like to hear from you. Tell me, what was the last time you noticed yourself acting on autopilot? This season is not just about awareness, it is about transformation, real, lived moment-to-moment transformation. And this is just the beginning. So until next time, stay bold, stay fierce, and always go beyond the mind.